many of you have already asked, what are pivot tables, how to use it, when to use it, et cetera, and we can get started there. I think pivot tables is often like one of the very first starting points in getting introduced to kind of the general tools in Excel. Specifically, if you wanted to do a quick kind of data analysis on kind of understand, the underlying data in a better way and present it in a form that is succinct and modular, then a pivot table would be perfect. So the quick definition is that it's an Excel tool, really. So it's a function in Excel that you can use to organize, manage, and sort data sets in a quick and dynamic way. The ultimate purpose, and I would say the whole point of a pivot table is to synthesize data records in a way that you would like to present it. And why and when you would use a tool like this is when you're trying to better understand the underlying data. So why and when should you use it? I would say that the most important things about a pivot table are to understand that you should be looking to summarize, analyze, explore, or present the data. So if you're trying to summarize a large data set of thousands of rows, a pivot table could do that very quickly and synthesize that data in a way where it would be easy to kind of see, the trends, as well as kind of analyze this subsets of data or in particular parts of the data that you would like to look at. But one of the few things from what was mentioned before, I think Daphne said, okay, data is like about something mentioned about my philosophy that, data analysis is about finding the signal in the noise. I think that, having an idea of the desired output is part of finding that signal in the noise. Thinking about data analysis and pivot tables as a way to kind of organize, that noise or the entirety of that data in a way that where you can kind of generate some level of insight to make decisions better. So a couple things that I would think about are you trying to produce the data in an organized way or perform simple functions on the data to generate insight? Or are you trying to illuminate kind of trends of the data over time? A lot of the data that you would look at traditionally has to do with a time series or has a date attached to a record. So are you trying to kind of look at these trends over time, which is like very much one of the most common ways to kind of understand and look at data analysis. I would also say that, with a pivot table, one of the most powerful things you can do with a pivot table is to kind of look at the different slices of the data itself. And I can go into a live example a little bit further on. A few other examples of functional uses of a pivot table is to organize the data into columns and rows with automatic calculations. So if you're trying to count a certain category within the data set or some particular numbers, et cetera, whether that's a donation amount, et cetera, or like units, other types of units, then you could do that within a pivot table. You can run automatic calculations on that. You can segment the data by date and other variables and create percentages of totals. And I'll cover all of this stuff in the live example in just a few minutes. Another important consideration is, before you even start using a pivot table, I would strongly encourage you to spend a few minutes to think about the underlying data. The utility of this type of tool within Excel highly depends on the nature of the data itself. A few examples are, for data sets are, donor, kind of billing, activity tracking data, satisfaction surveys, and customer client data. All can be used, all can be applied, with a pivot table to derive some level of insight. Before moving on to how to the live example, I want to go over some limitations of the pivot table. Now, a pivot table is a tool, but but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best tool to be used all the time within Excel. So here's some limitations of the pivot table, just so you know. One, the pivot table does not automatically update every single time. It must be manually refreshed. It
Oh,
cannot.
and I'm sorry, Alex, I'm going to jump in. Are you sharing your screen? Are you showing the deck?
Oh, I thought I was.
I just
Sorry.
realized that's all right. No worries at all. That's part of the challenges of technology because I realized
Apologies. I
that
thought I was sharing.
no worries because you were doing your wonderful kind of introduction and then going into the limitations and I was like I thought there was a slide. All right, hey, thanks. Let you go on.
Wonderful. Thank you, Daphne. Apologies if you couldn't see my, because you couldn't see my screen just a few minutes ago, but now you can. And, I was just going over the definitions as you saw before. What is a pivot table, right? In the image that you see on this slide, you can see an example with the data set on the very left and the pivot table to the right. And like I said, it's a very powerful tool to kind of summarize data in a very quick and succinct way. The following slide, I just wanted to highlight that, the core of using a pivot table has to do with summarizing, analyzing, exploring, and presenting the data itself. So, I would think about those four things when, considering when and why to kind of apply this sort of function within Excel. And the important takeaway also is, the last bullet point of, potentially applicable data sets that you can apply this to, which is includes but is not limited to donor, billing, activity tracking, satisfaction surveys, and customer and client data. But going over limitations, and this is where I kind of just left off. I wanted to emphasize that it's not automatically refreshed. Every single time you update the kind of source data or underlying data, so it doesn't automatically refresh and reflect that new data. So you have to manually do that. In addition to that, a pivot table cannot display more than 50,000 rows. Additionally, if you would like to kind of double click or look into the underlying data itself from the pivot table, you're not able to do that unless you go into right click and go to the source data. But it's not available to view in the pivot table itself. And conditional formatting, which means that, highlighting certain cells and not highlighting others based on rules, is not functional within a pivot table. However, all of this stuff is available to do in Excel itself. It's just there are limits to the utility of this function.